What I'm going to read is from the Message. In this text, there's not a lot of difference. So follow along what you hear and with what you read. You'll see minor differences. Today's gospel reading is not about what character we relate to most, Mary or Judas, or who has it right. It's not about what they did or said. Believe it or not, it's really about extravagant love. As you listen to the reading and follow along. 6 days before Passover, Jesus entered Bethany, where Lazarus, so recently raised from the dead, was living. Lazarus and his sisters invited Jesus to dinner at their home. Martha served. Lazarus was one of those sitting at the table with them. Mary came in with a jar of very expensive aromatic oils, anointed and massaged Jesus' feet, and then wiped them with her hair. The fragrance of the oils filled the house. Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, even then getting ready to betray him, said, "Why wasn't this oil sold and the money given to the poor? It would have been easily brought 300 silver pieces." He said this not because he cared 2 cents about the poor, but because he was a thief. He was in charge of their common funds, but he also embezzled them. Jesus said, "Let her alone. She's anticipating and honoring the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you. You don't always have me." Not long ago, or I should say, not long after Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, after he and the disciples went off into the wilderness, Jesus returns and goes to the home of Lazarus, where dinner is served. And Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. But this is also a time of a simple sharing of comfort, meal, and friendship between best friends. Mary, Lazarus, and Jesus. And as I recall in my scripture studies, it's the only sneak peek of Jesus with friends. Here, Jesus is a dear friend sharing some downtime, resting, and having a home-cooked meal. Mary and Lazarus are huge supporters of Jesus' ministry. They follow and believe in what he says and what he does. In today's reading, we see how much Mary has heard and understood what Jesus has been telling the disciples along the way. It's in this moment she prepares the way for Jesus' next and ultimately final journey. The verse in our reading, which really catches everyone, though, is the 8th verse, where Jesus responds to Judas, telling him they've always have the poor around, but they won't always have him with them. Mary understands this. And other Jewish believers have heard it before in the 5th book of the Torah, Deuteronomy 15, verse 11, where it says, "Since there will never cease to be some in need of the earth, I therefore command you, open your hand to the poor and needy neighbor in your land." You see, we all live side by side. The wealthy, the rich, the average earner, the poor, and the outcast. We are in each other's midst all the time. How does this make us feel? What do our 5 senses tell us when we are in the midst of this diversity? When in the midst of the poor and the outcast? Through the ages, The average and the wealthy have looked down upon the poor and the outcast. And even yet today, in various societies around our world, people turn and walk the other way, cross the street as not to get too close to those smelly, dirty, homeless folks. We see it in our own bigger cities. I think also about Mother Teresa in Calcutta, who went to the dumps to work with and be there for the poor and outcast, because that's where they lived. That's where the scraps of food were and things they could use. Years ago, those with TB and cancer also were outcast in our society. Folks shunned them and stayed far away. Back in the mid-80s, I remember in Wisconsin, certain political parties wanted to do away with any food or health care for the poor, thinking they just needed incentive to work. Well, some did, I'll agree. Some, it was a family tradition that they, in fact, didn't work, but were on welfare. But for many of the poor and needy, they couldn't work due to their health, or they had children with no one to care for them while they worked a full shift, or during the summers or holidays. Many had low self-esteem or a history of mental or physical trauma in their lives, which has paralyzed them emotionally and from taking any action for themselves. It's so easy in our world today for many to turn their backs on those who are less fortunate or different than us. We frequently think, I pulled myself through the mud and made it. Why can't they? Many folks think all they have to do is be determined and they can pull themselves through it. That's what some of our politicians thought. Well, reality is, it's not how it works in many circumstances. Today, Jesus is letting us all know we need to be extravagant givers of love in how we live with and relate to all people, all our neighbors, all those who are outcast in our world today. Yes, the poor are always with us, but yes, we ignore their needs as a society. We ignore who they are, their different lifestyles, how they have been able to survive in the midst of it all. You see, it's how folks can be sure the poor will always be with us. They'll always exist with us if we ignore them. Nothing will change. But Jesus is always with us, so we say, yet we live frequently as if Jesus is not always with us. Jesus is here in our scripture today. He's there for Judas, yet Judas lived and acted as if Jesus wasn't always there with him. We, each of us, needs to acknowledge Jesus' presence in our lives. The poor are always with us, yet we don't acknowledge it. And Jesus is always with us, and we don't acknowledge it. Today, you and I are invited to give a great gift, an extravagant gift to Jesus. By giving an extravagant gift to those in poverty. To be there for and with those poor and outcast, not to step around and across the street, to be there with and for them, and to acknowledge who they are, and that they are a gift to us too. After all, this is the gift Jesus experienced with his close friend Mary and Lazarus. It's also the gift given to each of us in the next week of Jesus' journey to Jerusalem. Jesus left for Jerusalem knowing fully what was going to happen, knowing Jesus was going to pay for some of the gifts he gave along the way, things like healing, vision, restoring vision, and acceptance, and now raising Lazarus from the dead. Jesus knows the betrayal is coming, not only from Judas, but from others. He knows he will be crucified and later resurrected. After all, he just brought Lazarus back to life 4 days ago. And they're not only talking about killing Jesus, but also Lazarus. And knowing all of this, how can you and I become extravagant gift bearers to those outcasts in our society today? Knowing this, knowing what Jesus knew and still walked through it, how can we be there for those? Many we don't know, and some we do.